It is a truth universally ignored by Scotland Yard that no one murders a bishop in a dry chapel. This particular bishop, one Hector Brambling, D.D., Oxon, High Church, Low Humour, had been found slumped across the chancel steps of St. Pulteney in the Fen, his mitre askew and one arm flung almost theatrically toward the alabaster font. There had been some awkwardness about removing the body, as the sacristan insisted on finishing the morning hymn first. Lettuce with a gladsome mind was not, in retrospect, the ideal accompaniment to a clergyman's corpse. Lord Peter Death, Braden Wimsey, who had arrived at the vicarage with all the air of a man expecting a limp cup of tea and a heavier sermon, paused on the threshold of the chapel and made his customary first observation, not upon the body, which was still decently veiled by the altar cloth, but upon a guttering beeswax candle still burning at the foot of the brass rood screen. "Curious thing, Parker," he murmured to the inspector beside him, "that a candle should last so long after the prayers have gone out. Almost seems obstinate, doesn't it?" "Quite," said Charles Parker, who was altogether used to Wimsey's brand of theological irreverence. "But it's the bishop I'm concerned with. Blunt force trauma, apparently. Head met the edge of the communion rail, rather decisively." I suppose it didn't meet it halfway. How unecumenical." Wimsey twitched back the edge of the altar cloth with a penknife borrowed from the verger, revealing a pale face, slack with death and vaguely surprised, like a man discovering the soup was off. "It's not what one expects in a place like this," continued Parker, flipping open his notebook. "The vicar claims he left the bishop here alone after Compline, locked up the chapel and went home to his wife. The place was empty till the morning organist arrived for matins and found the body. So I was still locked from the inside." Wimsey straightened with a frown of pleasurable perplexity. "Then either the bishop suffered a late-night compulsion to batter himself to death on the altar rails, or we are dealing with something cleverer. Locked room, eh? Delicious." He drifted, as was his wont, not toward the obvious, but toward the neglected. He poked delicately at a pair of iron curtain chains near the vestry, paused to peer up at the bell tower, though it had not been rung in months, and tapped one polished tile with the toe of his suede boot. No sign of a struggle. None, and nothing stolen, robe still hung up, mitre untouched, except that Parker gestured at a note, half-burned, found beside the bishop's hand. It read, "By candlelight he saw the truth. In darkness it shall be buried." Wimsey read it twice, then produced a monocle with the solemnity of a stage magician. How delightfully cryptic! Though as messages go, it suffers from a certain poetic vulgarity. One almost expects an exclamation point. And the hand, what is it, clerical Gothic, certainly not the bishop's own. Parker was not to be baited. "I've already sent it to the lab, and I've put a call through to the Bishop of Ely. He'll want to know what's happened to one of his." Indeed. Poor fellow. Still, he always did read his sermons as if, awaiting divine interruption, Wimsey turned back to the stubborn little candle, now flickering low but not out. "You know," he added mildly, "I once read of a Roman ritual involving a candle that must not be extinguished under pain of death, in a rather thrilling account of early martyrdoms. Of course, I dare say our bishop wasn't in the habit of conducting pagan ceremonies before bedtime." "Are you suggesting this has something to do with a ritual?" Parker asked. "Oh no, my dear Charles, I'm suggesting it has something to do with someone wanting it to look like it does." He smiled, thin, unreadable, and infuriatingly certain, and walked into the vestry with the loose-limbed gait of a man unconcerned with death, but terribly interested in detail. And behind them, unnoticed by the constable, the candle finally guttered out. Wimsey emerged from the vestry some 20 minutes later, smoothing a faint smudge from his cuff with exaggerated fastidiousness. Parker, who had spent the interval interviewing the verger, an earnest man of 60 with white eyebrows like ecclesiastical moths, looked up from his notes. "Well?" he asked. "I have discovered, my dear Charles," said Wimsey, "that, while the Church of England may no longer burn heretics, it does an admirable job of incinerating paper. The vestry stove is still warm though the fire's out, ashes of a rather distinctive hue. Not sermon drafts, I fancy, unless Bishop Brambling had a sudden shift toward apocalyptic modernism." "You think something was destroyed after the murder?" I think something was destroyed, and it was not a hymn to brotherly love. Whimsy strolled toward the chancel with an absent look. Did you happen to ask our moth-like verger whether the chapel had been used the previous night? He insists not. The bishop came alone around 8:30 for private prayer, which I gather was not unusual. No one else entered after the vicar locked up at 10, and no keys missing. No signs of forced entry either. Whimsy crouched beside the heavy iron bolt on the inner chapel door. You see, Charles, this bolt presents a delightful paradox. It was shot when the organist arrived, but the vicar swears he didn't fasten it. So either our bishop bolted himself in, implying suicide, or someone else did, and then managed to vanish in a puff of Anglican smoke. Parker frowned. But there's no way out once the bolt's drawn from inside. Exactly. Which makes me wonder, did anyone think to test the bell tower hatch? They did not, and Whimsy insisted on ascending at once. The tower stairs, narrow and cold, coiled like a snail's spine toward the sky. At the top, in the belfry's chill hush, they found the tiny service hatch unlatched. The wooden frame bore fresh scratches. Someone had pushed through in a hurry. Outside, a narrow ledge ran along the sloping roof. A risky, desperate route, but not impossible for the light-footed or foolish. A young man, said Whimsy, brushing a faint smear of soot from the edge, or a woman in trousers. No skirts would survive that crawl. A servant, Parker. Hazarded, possibly, or someone familiar with the building, and confident they wouldn't be seen. After all, no one expects foot traffic on chapel roofs. They descended silent for a few turns until Parker murmured, "That message, the note by the bishop, could it have come from the person who escaped that way?" Ah, yes. By candlelight he saw the truth. In darkness it shall be buried. The kind of note one might compose after attending a particularly maudlin reading of The Revenger's Tragedy. See, it suggests, doesn't it, a crime not committed in haste or for gain, but for retribution. The candle, the message, the hidden exit, they all speak of theatre, and perhaps... He stopped short. What? I was about to say a confession, but no, something subtler. A performance. Someone wanted the bishop's death to feel orchestrated, symbolic. They returned to the nave, where a young constable hovered nervously with a list of names. Local clergy, staff from the bishop's residence, and a few eccentric parishioners who had made themselves prominent in the chapel's affairs. Whimsy skimmed it with a faintly pained expression. "Do get me coffee, Charles, if the Almighty permits it in Lent," he said. "And let's begin with the bishop's housekeeper. A woman who manages a bishop's laundry likely knows more sins than she admits in confession." Mrs. Ada Melling, 63, angular and starched, received them in the bishop's library. Narrow room smelling of candle wax, furniture polish, and damp paperbacks of an apologetic nature. She stood with arms folded, gazing at them as one might regard a pair of moths with criminal tendencies. His Grace was a good man, she declared, even before Whimsy sat down. Not kind, particularly, but upright. He read 3 psalms before breakfast and said his own grace in Latin. "How singular," murmured Whimsy. "Did he have enemies, Mrs. Melling?" "No man of virtue avoids them entirely." "Indeed, but had he quarrelled recently? With any member of the clergy, say? Or perhaps a parishioner with strong views on candles and righteousness?" She hesitated. "He did receive a letter last week. He burned it." Whimsy perked up. "In that stove, perhaps?" "I wouldn't know." She pursed her lips. "It came without return address. He read it once, frowned, and threw it in the fire. I asked if I should save the envelope, and he said, 'There's poison in that ink, Ada. Let it burn.'" How lyrical. And after that, was he agitated, distracted? Not visibly. He fasted on Wednesday, but that was not unusual. Was he in good health? Oh yes, a touch of gout, but nothing serious. He rarely took medicine. And his visitors that day? She consulted a worn notepad. "Mr. Crail in the morning, he's the diocesan accountant. Then Miss Lutterworth, who brings the flower rota. And young Mr. Vane, assistant curate from Compline Chapel." "Vane," said Whimsy slowly. "That wouldn't be Sebastian Vane. Pale fellow, poet's face, walks as if rehearsing for a martyrdom. That's him, always quoting scripture." They argued. "Did they indeed?" Whimsy's voice sharpened. "What about?" "I couldn't hear. but Mr. Vane left looking white as chalk and muttering something about the lie that lives in silence. "Oh, marvellous. Charles, remind me to look up the man. I suspect he writes sonnets in blood." Mrs. Melling gave him a hard stare. "One more thing," said Wimsey, rising. "Did the bishop have any peculiarities, any rituals, apart from the 3 Psalms and the Latin grace?" "Well," she paused. "He wouldn't go near the old reliquary in the vestry cupboard." Wimsey blinked. "Reliquary?" "Yes, from the chapel's Catholic days. A little silver box carved with saints. He found it once, years ago, and told me to keep it shut. Said it gave him a cold feeling. Odd thing to say, but I did as told." Wimsey looked genuinely pleased. "Superstition from a bishop? Now that's intriguing. Where is it now?" "In the cupboard, behind the chalice case. They retrieved it within the hour. The box was tarnished, its hinges nearly fused. Inside was nothing but a trace of incense and a faint metallic tang." Wimsey held it delicately, examining the base with his glass. "Scratched," he murmured. "Recently. And the lid's been opened and shut many times." He tucked it under his arm and turned to Parker. "My dear man, we have a house of worship, with a bishop who feared a reliquary, a vanished letter, a poetic curate, and a locked chapel where a candle burned long after its time. And I have a suspicion that someone has been performing a liturgy all their own." "You think Vane's involved?" "I think Mr. Vane may know what the bishop saw by candlelight and what he meant to bury in darkness." Wimsey's voice dropped to a murmur. "Let's go find him before he has time to write the final verse." They found Sebastian Vane in the vicarage garden, standing beneath a skeletal yew tree, his slender figure framed against the bleak sky like a living silhouette in some morose etching. He was reading from a small leather-bound book, presumably the Psalms or one of his own compositions, but he looked up as Wimsey and Parker approached, eyes gleaming with a mixture of apprehension and a certain defiant melancholy. "Mr. Vane," Wimsey began, "we have some questions that may trouble your conscience or at least your poetic sensibilities. Might we trouble you for a moment's conversation?" The curate closed his book with a soft snap and nodded, the trace of a nervous smile touching his lips. "Of course, Lord Peter, though I confess I find all this somewhat theatrical." "Indeed," Wimsey replied, stepping closer. "And yet the stage is set, the actors assembled. The question remains, who holds the script?" Vane's eyes flickered towards the chapel as if seeking some unseen reassurance. "I spoke with Bishop Brambling last evening, yes. We disagreed. More fervently than usual, I fear. He was convinced the church should root out heresies with iron and fire. I argued for mercy for the gentler way. He was unmoved." "Did this disagreement become heated?" Parker asked, ever the pragmatic. "Sharp words, but nothing beyond that," Vane assured. "I left in frustration, but not anger. I swear it." Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. "And the letter he burned? Any idea what it contained?" Vane's pale face tightened. "I do not know. The bishop was secretive about his correspondence. He said some things should be consumed by flame, and that night he seemed troubled." "Consumed by flame," Wimsey repeated, tapping his chin. "Curious phrase. I wonder if the bishop was attempting to destroy more than paper." The curate looked startled. "You think he was hiding something?" "Not hiding, perhaps. Guarding. The question is from whom or what?" Wimsey motioned towards the chapel. "May we see your rooms, Mr. Vane? Perhaps there is something there that might illuminate this darkness." They followed Vane through the winding corridors of the vicarage, past portraits of long-deceased rectors, whose eyes seemed to watch with disapproval, into a small, sparsely furnished chamber lined with bookshelves. A thin shaft of light fell through a narrow window, casting long shadows over a writing desk cluttered with parchment and quills. Wimsey began to inspect the room, noting with interest the array of clocks, each set to slightly different times. A brass carriage clock showed 8:30, while a tall grandfather clock stubbornly ticked toward 9. "You keep careful time, I see," Wimsey remarked, tapping one clock lightly. "Do you often find yourself out of sync?" Vane shrugged. "I suppose it helps keep one alert." "Indeed, and yet," Wimsey continued, "time seems to have played a curious game last night. The chapel door was locked from the inside at 10. Yet someone had to exit, presumably before or after the bishop's demise. How does one leave a locked room without a key or a passage? The curate's eyes narrowed. There are no secret doors in the chapel as far as I know. Secret doors rarely announce themselves, Whimsy said dryly. We discovered a hatch in the bell tower, a precarious escape route for a desperate soul. Vane paled. The hatch? I had no knowledge of it. Curious omission. Tell me, Mr. Vane, do you know much about the chapel's relics? The reliquary, the curate said softly. Yes, I have seen it. The bishop forbade me from opening it. Does that strike you as ordinary ecclesiastical prudence or something else? Vane hesitated. He once said it gave him a cold feeling. I did not press him. Whimsy's gaze grew sharper. Cold feelings often come from warm places, Mr. Vane. Emotions buried, secrets kept, and sometimes a reliquary holds more than saints' bones. It can hold fears and regrets. There was a long silence. The curate's hands trembled slightly as he reached for a worn leather folder. I found this among the bishop's papers, he said. He had asked me to keep it safe, but never explained why. Whimsy took the folder with care. Inside were letters and notes, some official church documents, but among them was a faded photograph of a young woman, smiling but with eyes that suggested a complicated past. The back bore a single word in faded ink. Remember. Who is she? Whimsy asked. Her name was Clara Melling. She was the bishop's sister. Our family secrets, always the subtlest poisons. Vane nodded. Clara died young, in tragic circumstances. There were rumors, nothing confirmed. The bishop never spoke of her except to say she was lost. To shadows. Whimsy replaced the folder in his pocket. Shadows that have a way of lengthening, it seems. Mr. Vane, was the bishop's relationship with his family troubled? Difficult, yes, he carried guilt. He once confessed to me that Clara's death was the fault of the church's neglect, and perhaps his own. That is a heavy burden, one that might explain the bishop's cryptic note and his need to protect certain truths. Parker interjected, but it still doesn't explain who would want him dead, or why they would stage this elaborate scenario with the candle and the locked chapel. Not yet, Whimsy admitted, but every mystery is a tapestry of half-seen threads, and I believe we are beginning to unravel the first. They left the curate's rooms, and as they passed through the corridor, Whimsy paused to glance at the old grandfather clock again. It chimed 9, slow and deliberate. Time, Whimsy mused aloud, is not merely a measure of moments, but a weapon in the hands of a clever murderer. We must consider not just where people were, but when. Back in the vicarage parlour, the trio awaited the arrival of the diocesan accountant, Mr. Crail, whose presence promised yet another angle on the bishop's final days. Crail was a man of precise habits and sharp eyes, known for his unwavering devotion to balance sheets and his equally rigid sense of propriety. When he arrived, he wasted little time on pleasantries. I understand you seek information on the bishop's affairs, he said briskly. His finances were sound, though not without complexity. He was involved in several charitable trusts, but recent withdrawals raised my concern. Withdrawals? Whimsy asked. Yes. Substantial sums moved from the church's funds to an anonymous account overseas. I reported it, but the bishop dismissed my inquiries, said it was for matters best left unspoken. Whimsy leaned forward, interest piqued. And did the bishop appear worried about this at all? Crail shook his head. No, but he was secretive, unusually so. I suspect he feared scandal. Matters best left unspoken, Whimsy repeated, and darkness to bury the truth. This all ties rather neatly. Parker, who had been silent, spoke up. Could this explain the bishop's fear of the reliquary? A symbolic gesture, perhaps. A superstition masking a very real guilt. Whimsy smiled thinly. Symbolism often serves as a veil over reality's harsher edges. We must probe deeper, and quickly, for the candle's flame has guttered out, but the shadows it cast remain. As they prepared to leave, Whimsy's attention was caught by a small detail, a thread of violet silk caught on the edge of a tablecloth. He picked it up with care. Violet, he said, a colour most unusual for clerical attire. Might I inquire, Mr. Crail, do you own many garments of this shade? Crail looked startled, then flushed. I have a waistcoat of that colour. Whimsy's eyes twinkled. I think, Charles, we have found a link between the accountant and the chapel's secret passage. I believe our suspects are not merely those with open motives, but those adept at weaving themselves into the fabric of this mystery. Threads unseen, but unbreakable. Parker nodded grimly. Then we must follow those threads to their source before the final act unfolds. Outside, the late afternoon sky darkened, and the wind carried with it the faint scent of incense and something else, something colder, more bitter. The village of St. Pulteney in the Fen seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that beneath its quiet, reverent surface, the truth waited, wrapped in shadow, waiting to be uncovered. Whimsy lit a cigarette, his eyes narrowing. Let us proceed. Charles, the candle that wouldn't go out has burned long enough. Soon it will be time to discover who dared to hold the wick. The evening thickened with a damp fog as Whimsy and Parker made their way back to the vicarage, the lamplight casting long, wavering shadows upon the slick cobblestones. The village, usually so sedate at this hour, now seemed cloaked in a subtle tension, as though the mist itself conspired to obscure truths best left hidden. Whimsy, taking a slow drag on his cigarette, allowed his gaze to wander over the familiar, yet now uncanny landscape. Charles, he murmured, there is a peculiar artistry to this little drama. We have a locked chapel, a bishop who feared his own relics, an accountant with a violet waistcoat, and a curate whose poetry reeks of martyrdom. All the ingredients for a rather splendid tragedy, but one which I trust will end with a clear solution rather than an epilogue of lamentations. Parker sighed. It would be nice to see justice served without the usual theatrics. Justice is itself a performance, Whimsy said with a wry smile. It must be both precise and convincing. Now, I propose we pay a visit to Miss Lutterworth, a lady who arranges flowers no less, often underestimated in her knowledge of human nature. The vicarage door creaked open to reveal Miss Helena Lutterworth, a woman in her late 40s with an angular face, softened only by the gentle earnestness of her green eyes. She greeted them with a polite nod and led them into a parlour scented faintly with lavender and old paper. I understand you wish to discuss the bishop's last days, she said, settling into an armchair with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to listening more than speaking. Precisely. We are piecing together a rather intricate puzzle, and your observations may be the missing petal. Helena smiled faintly. I did notice the bishop seemed distracted lately. More than usual, I mean. He was a man of strict routine, yet last week he neglected his evening prayers twice. Whimsy raised an eyebrow. Neglected, that is indeed unusual. Yes, and he was often seen walking the grounds late at night, clutching a small box, not unlike the reliquary, I imagine. An interesting detail. Did anyone else notice this nocturnal habit? Only myself and Mr. Crail, the accountant. They spoke quietly on several occasions in the library, but I was never close enough to overhear. Did the bishop receive visitors at odd hours? Miss Lutterworth's gaze sharpened. There was a young woman, Mrs. Clara Melling's niece, I believe, Miss Edith Harrow. She arrived unexpectedly 2 days ago, quite agitated, and was admitted despite the bishop's usual formality. Miss Harrow, Whimsy mused. A relative bearing familial concerns, perhaps? Did you observe the nature of their discourse? Not directly, but after she left, the bishop seemed unsettled, pacing his study for some time. Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. We shall have to meet Miss Harrow soon. The family secrets grow thicker. He glanced at his watch, noting the steady ticking of the mantel clock. Time, as always, remains our most demanding companion. Before departing, Whimsy noticed a small bouquet of wilting violets on a side table. He picked one up delicately. And these, Miss Lutterworth, not usual church flowers, Helena smiled. They were the bishop's favourite. He claimed they reminded him of lost youth and unspoken regrets. Whimsy's smile was faintly sad. Regrets indeed, Miss Lutterworth. Regrets that sometimes speak louder than sermons. As they left, Parker whispered, You think the bishop's past is catching up with him? More than catching, Whimsy said. It seems to be overtaking him. The next morning found them at the rectory of Compline Chapel, where Sebastian Vane served. The curate greeted them with a mixture of curiosity and guarded reserve. Whimsy wasted no time. Mr. Vane, You spoke of a disagreement with the bishop. Might you elucidate the nature of your quarrel? Vane sighed. He believed the church should uphold its doctrines with iron resolve. I argued that compassion must temper judgment. It was a clash of convictions, nothing more. Yet you left in some distress? Yes. I feared the bishop was losing sight of mercy. Wimsey's gaze sharpened. Mercy and murder are not often companions. Tell me, did you observe anything unusual in the chapel on the evening of his death? Vane hesitated. I thought I heard voices, whispers in Latin, but no one was there when I entered. Whispers in Latin, Wimsey mused. An invocation perhaps, or mere academic musing? Possibly both, Vane admitted. The bishop was fond of ancient rites. And the reliquary? You said it gave him a cold feeling. Yes. He once showed me its contents, a fragment of bone and a piece of parchment. The parchment bore an inscription warning against the sin that gnaws the soul. He seemed deeply unsettled. Wimsey's eyes glinted. Curious that a bishop would harbour such fears. It suggests guilt, or at least a heavy conscience. And you, Mr. Vane, do you harbour any secrets? The curate looked down, fingers nervously twisting. Only those that faith might one day forgive. Wimsey inclined his head. Faith is a complex companion, Mr. Vane. Sometimes it shelters us, sometimes it condemns. Before they left, Wimsey requested to see Vane's personal effects, and, among his modest belongings, they found a scrap of paper with a hastily scrawled note. The candle burns beyond the flame. The truth lies beneath the ashes. Wimsey pocketed the note, his mind racing. Later that afternoon, back at the bishop's residence, Parker and Wimsey confronted Mr. Crail once more. The accountant appeared uneasy, his violet waistcoat conspicuous in the dim light. Mr. Crail, Wimsey began, you have been very helpful, but one detail remains troubling. The anonymous overseas account, do you know its beneficiary? Crail shifted. No. The bishop gave strict instructions never to disclose it. Said it was for the church's protection. Protection or concealment, Wimsey pressed. Crail faltered. I can say no more. Wimsey smiled thinly. Very well. We shall see if further inquiries can shed light on this shadowed transaction. As night fell, the two men returned to the chapel. Wimsey, with his characteristic thoroughness, examined the candles left burning near the altar. One, curiously, refused to extinguish despite repeated attempts. A candle that won't go out, he murmured. Symbolic indeed. He knelt, inspecting the wick and surrounding wax. No trick wax, no draught, simply a stubborn flame, much like our mystery. Parker observed the flickering light with unease. Do you think it has some connection to the murder? More likely, Wimsey said. It is a metaphor left deliberately by the perpetrator, a signature of sorts. The crime, after all, is a work of art, and every artist desires their mark. As they left, Wimsey's eyes caught the glint of the reliquary in the vestry, now slightly ajar. A faint chill seemed to emanate from it, as though it held more than relics, perhaps the very heart of the secret they sought. Tomorrow, Wimsey said, we shall peer deeper into these shadows. For tonight, the candle burns, but soon it will flicker and reveal the truth concealed within its flame. The morning sun crept reluctantly over the mist-laden fields as Wimsey and Parker returned to the bishop's residence, the house now a stage for their continuing scrutiny. The atmosphere inside had thickened overnight, not with incense but with an intangible tension that seemed to settle in the shadows and linger in the corners like a silent witness. Wimsey's eyes were sharp as ever, dissecting every detail, with a meticulousness that suggested the man's brain was perpetually untangling a knot only he could see. Charles, he said softly, we have before us a tableau that is far less a random tragedy than a carefully painted composition. Each stroke, each character, each motive adds layers of complexity. Our task is to reveal the true image beneath the varnish. They began their inquiries anew with the household staff, returning to the steward, Mrs. Dilwyn, whose loyalty to the late bishop was both obvious and deeply personal. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she poured tea, the fine china clinking under her nervous touch. I knew Bishop Fenton well, she began, though I won't pretend he was an easy man to serve. His temper was as sudden as a storm at sea, yet he could be gentle as a lamb one moment, then icy the next. "Did you notice any visitors besides Miss Harrow these last days?" Wimsey asked, peering over the rim of his cup. Mrs. Dillwyn hesitated. "There was Mr. Alistair Grimes, the bishop's solicitor. He came late the evening before the death, but left hurriedly as if called away." "A solicitor summoned in haste," Wimsey mused. "And was there any talk, Mrs. Dillwyn, of wills or legacies?" Mrs. Dillwyn swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. Whispers of a new will, but no one except the bishop and Mr. Grimes knew its contents." Parker exchanged a glance with Wimsey. "A new will could upset many apple carts." "Indeed," Wimsey agreed, "and might provide a motive stronger than simple jealousy or revenge." The conversation turned to the household's routine. Mrs. Dillwyn mentioned a peculiarity. The chapel's candles were replaced every evening by the bishop himself. He was said to be particular about their scent and flame quality. Curious, Wimsey noted, for a man so steeped in ritual to attend personally to such a small matter. It speaks of obsession, perhaps fear. As they prepared to leave, Wimsey's attention was caught by a small scrap of parchment pinned beneath the tea tray. He unfolded it delicately to reveal a fragment of a letter written in a hurried scrawl. "The sins of the past will not be buried with the bones. They seek the light no matter how faint." An ominous note, Wimsey said quietly. Who would wish to remind the bishop of sins past? And why now? Their next visit was to the solicitor's office, a modest establishment tucked between the village bakery and the post office. Mr. Grimes was a man in his early 50s, thin-lipped and precise, with a manner as clinical as his handwriting. "I cannot disclose the will's specifics," he said curtly. "Client confidentiality and all that. However, I may say the bishop's intentions would have been unexpected, to say the least." Wimsey's eyes twinkled with mild reproach. "Mr. Grimes, one does hope unexpected does not mean unduly disruptive. Let us say that it involved substantial changes, including the establishment of a trust fund for an individual not widely known to the community," the solicitor replied, folding his hands neatly. "Ah, an unknown beneficiary. The plot thickens." "And I trust you have considered the implications of such a bequest?" Grimes asked, his tone implying unspoken threats. "Indeed, but it is not the bequest alone that intrigues me, but the timing and secrecy. May I ask, did you visit the bishop alone that night?" "Yes, I was summoned by a message of urgency. We discussed the will and the bishop's concerns over certain matters of his past that he wished sealed." "Concerns over the past," Wimsey repeated. "Our bishop's regrets seem to weave through every corner of this mystery." Leaving the solicitor, Wimsey and Parker returned to the village, where the presence of Miss Edith Harrow awaited. She was a young woman with a nervous energy, eyes darting as though chased by shadows. "Miss Harrow," Wimsey began gently, "we understand you arrived unexpectedly, just days before the bishop's death. Might you share your reason for this visit?" Edith swallowed, glancing at Parker before responding. "I came to warn him about my uncle's past, about secrets he hoped would remain buried." "Your uncle?" "Yes. Bishop Fenton was not always who he seemed. There are things I discovered, things that some would kill to keep hidden." Wimsey leaned forward, intrigued. "And what were these secrets, if I may be so bold?" Edith hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "Years ago, before he joined the church, he was involved in a scandal. Financial impropriety, some say even blackmail. I found letters, documents. I believed he was trying to make amends, but someone else had other plans." The mention of blackmail drew a thoughtful hum from Wimsey. A scandal from the past returning to demand its due, a familiar theme in our little drama. "And the candle that wouldn't go out?" Parker asked. "Do you know anything about that?" Edith nodded slowly. "It was a symbol, a warning, a message left for him, and for whoever might discover it." Wimsey's mind raced. Each new revelation was a thread, and he could feel them pulling taut toward a design. As twilight descended, they returned to the chapel. Wimsey carefully re-examined the candle in question, its flame stubbornly flickering against all attempts to quench. This," he murmured, "is no mere candle. It is a signpost, a deliberate challenge to the rational mind." "But why?" He cast his eyes about the vestry, noting the faint scent of lavender mingled with the wax. Then, His gaze settled on the reliquary once more. Its lid, slightly ajar yesterday, was now firmly closed. Yet he could swear he heard a faint ticking emanating from within. "Charles," Whimsy said, "there is something mechanical concealed here, something not quite in keeping with the sanctity of this place." He produced a small magnifying glass and examined the reliquary's surface. There, almost imperceptibly, was a fine seam, suggesting the reliquary was a clever container concealing more than sacred relics. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was the local constable, a man with a heavy brow and nervous manner. "Begging your pardon, Lord Peter," the constable said, "but there's been a curious development at the village post office. A parcel arrived this morning addressed to the bishop. No sender's name, but inside was a bundle of old letters and a small sealed envelope marked, 'For your eyes only.'" Whimsy's eyes narrowed. "The past, it seems, is insisting on a hearing." He thanked the constable and immediately set off for the post office, Parker at his heels. There the parcel lay awaiting their inspection, its contents smelling faintly of must and secrets. Whimsy carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single note, written in an elegant hand. "To the man who fears his sins more than his death, the candle will burn until the truth is told." Below this ominous message lay several letters, yellowed, "With age hinting at debts unpaid and favors called in, shadowy connections that spanned decades." Whimsy folded the note thoughtfully. "Our bishop was not merely haunted by conscience, Charles. He was ensnared in a web of obligations and betrayals, woven long ago and now tightened to a lethal snap." Parker exhaled. "So, the stage is set. Now all we need is the final act." Whimsy smiled faintly, lighting a fresh cigarette. "Patience, my friend. In this theatre, every player must have their moment under the spotlight. And the candle, though it burns on stubbornly, will soon flicker and reveal the face behind the mask." The morning dawned with a brittle clarity that seemed to slice through the lingering fog, revealing the village in a stark, unsentimental light. Lord Peter Whimsy arrived at Compline Chapel shortly before the hour, his gait leisurely but purposeful, a man whose thoughts travelled at a speed far exceeding his measured steps. Parker followed with a quiet efficiency, bearing a notebook and the usual assortment of tools, ready to capture the day's findings. Inside the dim interior of the chapel, the air was thick with the scent of beeswax and old timber, the very atmosphere, steeped in solemnity and whispered prayers. Whimsy moved with a connoisseur's eye, noting the peculiarities of the arrangement, the slightly askew crucifix, the worn pew cushions, the soft patina of dust on the hymn books. Yet it was the reliquary that drew and held his attention, the small silver box now resting on the altar, its clasp unopened since the night of the bishop's demise. Whimsy knelt and inspected the object closely, fingers probing the delicate filigree, noting the faintest traces of an oily residue on the edges. "A careful hand, but not an expert," he mused aloud, one who desired to appear respectful yet hurried. The scent, musty leather with a hint of lavender and something altogether less savory. A tobacco ash, perhaps, but of a peculiar kind. Parker frowned. "Do you think the killer touched this?" "Most certainly, though not to desecrate, but to retrieve something, or to plant a clue. Notice, Charles, how the reliquary's latch is unbroken, but not fully secured. How a culprit sought to make a show of respect while ensuring access." He glanced towards the nave, where sunlight streamed through stained glass, painting fractured rainbows on the stone floor. Their investigation was interrupted by the arrival of Miss Edith Harrow, the niece mentioned previously, a young woman with a sharp face and nervous eyes. She approached with cautious deference, clutching a small leather-bound notebook. "Miss Harrow," Whimsy greeted, his tone formally inviting, "you come at a propitious moment. We are examining the bishop's sanctuary and all its mysteries." She nodded, voice trembling slightly. I hope to speak with you. There are things I did not understand until too late. Pray, enlighten us." She produced the notebook, flipping to a page covered with dense, looping handwriting. "These are my uncle's journal entries. He kept them secret, fearing judgment, I think. They might explain why he was so troubled these last weeks." Whimsy accepted the book with a deft hand, already scanning the script. The entries were a curious mixture of clerical notes, personal reflections, and obscure references to the burden of relics and the shadow beyond the altar. "Remarkable," Whimsy murmured. "A bishop wrestling with both faith and fear, no stranger in these circles." "Uncle feared the reliquary," Edith continued, "not for its sanctity, but for what it might reveal. He hinted at a scandal, buried beneath the church's surface, something about a sin gnawing at the foundation." Parker exchanged a glance with Whimsy. "A scandal within the church? That would give motive enough to silence, wouldn't it?" "Indeed, Parker. Yet it is precisely the vagueness that intrigues me. We must look beyond the obvious. There is a psychology at work, veiled beneath ritual and duty." Whimsy rose, his expression settling into one of contemplative resolve. "Thank you, Miss Harrow. Your uncle's thoughts will guide our steps, like faint echoes in a hollow cathedral." They left the chapel to meet with the village constable, a man more accustomed to minor infractions than ecclesiastical intrigue. Constable Wilmot was a squat, ruddy-faced gentleman who greeted them with the wary politeness of one suddenly thrust into unfamiliar waters. "Mr. Whimsy, Mr. Parker," he began, "there's been talk among the villagers, strange noises at night, the candles burning without cause, and talk of the bishop's private meetings with odd visitors." Whimsy nodded. "We are aware of these odd visitors and unusual occurrences. Have you compiled a timeline of such events?" Wilmot produced a ledger, its pages filled with hastily recorded notes. There was a night watchman, an old fellow named Briggs, who swore he saw lights flickering in the chapel long after the last service. And a Mrs. Coldwell reported hearing chanting in Latin when the chapel was supposed to be empty. "Chanting," Whimsy repeated. "An echo of our curate's whispered words, perhaps." The constable nodded. "I've questioned all the usual suspects, but everyone claims ignorance. Except for one man, Jonathan Millward, the bishop's nephew. He's been quite agitated since the death." "Millward," Whimsy mused. "A man with motive and opportunity is seldom so polite as to deny either outright." "Shall we pay him a visit?" Parker suggested. Whimsy agreed, and soon they were crossing the village square toward Millward's modest residence. The man answered the door with a forced smile, his attire disheveled, eyes darting with restless energy. "I suppose you've come to accuse me," Millward said bluntly. "I've heard the whispers, the suspicions, but I was away the night it happened, at the railway station until nearly midnight." "An alibi," Whimsy acknowledged. "We shall verify it in due course. But first tell me about your relationship with your uncle." Millward's expression darkened. "We clashed often. He was a stern man, rigid in his beliefs. I thought him unfair, especially about the family fortune. He held back funds under the guise of church trust, but it was clear he preferred control to charity." "Control," Whimsy repeated, "is the currency of many a deadly quarrel." "Were there threats? Any quarrels you feared might escalate?" "No threats," Millward said quickly, "but I admit I was frustrated. I spoke sharply once or twice. Beyond that, nothing. You must believe me." Whimsy studied the man carefully. "I do not discount your frustration, Mr. Millward, yet there are subtleties in your manner that merit attention." Millward's eyes narrowed. "You think I'm guilty?" "On the contrary," Whimsy replied suavely, "I think you are a useful distraction." The interrogation over, Whimsy and Parker retreated to the vicarage garden, where the late afternoon sun began to warm the damp earth. "Millward's alibi needs checking," Whimsy mused, "and I find his anger genuine but not murderous. Our killer plays a longer game." Parker nodded. "Then what of the night watchman and Mrs. Coldwell's chanting? The echoes of superstition, no doubt, but layered upon real actions." "We must examine the chapel's soundproofing and the timing of the bishop's movements with greater precision." They returned to the chapel as twilight deepened, and Whimsy began testing the acoustics with measured taps and whispered phrases. The stone walls absorbed much sound, but the heavy oak doors leaked faint echoes into the corridor. "Interesting," he murmured. "If someone wished to create the illusion of voices or ritual when none existed, these features would be invaluable." Parker pointed to the candle that stubbornly burned near the altar. "And the candle? Why won't it go out?" Whimsy's smile was enigmatic. "A deliberate trick, I suspect. Perhaps a chemical treatment on the wick or wax to resist extinguishing. It is a sign, a message. one that says the crime is not finished and the flame of truth still flickers in the dark. As they left, the evening bells tolled with a mournful cadence, each ring a reminder that in this village of secrets and shadows, the past was not yet done with the present, and the candle that wouldn't go out was far from the only enigma awaiting the dawn. The early morning mist clung stubbornly to the village rooftops, casting a silvery veil that softened the edges of the world and lent a tentative hush to the air. Whimsy, invigorated by a restless night's reflection, was already at the vicarage garden when Parker arrived with a sheaf of papers and a purposeful air. The ledger from the railway station and the corroborating testimonies, now gathered with care, were laid out between them like fragments of a carefully crafted mosaic. "Millward's presence at the station is confirmed," Parker reported. "Several witnesses recall seeing him there well past 11 o'clock. The ticket clerk remembers his purchase and even recalls a brief conversation about a delayed train." Whimsy nodded, absently flicking a crumb of soil from the page. "A solid alibi. Then, but not beyond reproach, we must consider the possibility of an elaborate deception, one that, like a magician's flourish, distracts from the critical moment." Parker raised an eyebrow. "Such as? A well-timed return, perhaps? Or a swap of clothes in a shadowed alley? Yet these are fanciful. We must begin with certainties before conjecture." Their footsteps carried them back to Compline Chapel, where the candle still burned with defiance upon the altar. Whimsy regarded it with an arch smile. "This obstinate flame, a symbol if ever there was one. Let us discover what sustains it." The chapel was colder now, the faint scent of wax mingling with a distant hint of damp stone and something far less identifiable. A faint trace of camphor or resin, perhaps. Whimsy knelt by the candle, his fingers deftly removing it from its holder. A brief examination revealed an unusual wax blend, subtly textured, and the wick treated with an invisible coating designed to resist extinguishing by air or touch. "An impressive little chemical ruse," he remarked, "worthy of a stage illusionist." Parker frowned. "But to what end? A warning? A distraction? Both, or neither. It signals a mind attentive to symbolism, a message sent to those who understand, and a source of confusion to those who do not." Their contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of the village apothecary, a tall man with nervous hands and spectacles that perpetually slid down his nose. He introduced himself as Mr. Crispin and carried a small satchel filled with vials and powders. "I heard of your interest in the candle, Lord Peter," Crispin said, setting down his bag. "I can confirm the treatment is unusual, involving a rare mix of camphor, beeswax, and a resin I import from the East. It's designed for lanterns used on ship decks, resistant to sea winds and moisture." "Fascinating," Whimsy mused. "And who would have access to such materials here, Mr. Crispin?" "Only I and perhaps Father Aldous, the curate. The latter is known to dabble in alchemical texts and rare remedies." "Alchemical texts," Whimsy repeated, the faintest hint of irony curling his lips. "A curious hobby for a man of the cloth. We must pay him a visit." The curate's quarters were modest, but filled with an eclectic collection of books, dried herbs, and curious apparatus. Father Aldous received them with a mixture of suspicion and polite curiosity. "Lord Peter Whimsy," he said, "I trust your investigations progress without undue interference." "On the contrary, Father," Whimsy replied smoothly. "Your expertise in chemistry and symbolism has proven most enlightening. Might you explain your interest in such arcane subjects?" Aldous' eyes flickered briefly. "The Church is a repository of mysteries, not merely spiritual but natural. The study of substances, their properties and interactions, is a way to understand God's creation more fully." Whimsy nodded, masking a quiet skepticism. "A commendable pursuit, though some might find it veering dangerously close to the occult." "Superstition, Lord Peter," Aldous said quickly. Here's no room for such folly in faith." Yet the conversation revealed little of substance beyond the curate's own alibi. He had been in his quarters preparing for Sunday service, corroborated by the cook who had passed by several times. Leaving the curate, Whimsy and Parker returned to the vicarage, where Edith Harrow awaited with an anxious expression. She brought news that the village postmistress had reported an unusual delivery the day before the murder. A sealed package addressed to the bishop, left unsigned and without explanation. Would it not be prudent to examine this package? Whimsy suggested. Edith retrieved the parcel, wrapped in brown paper and tied with coarse twine. Whimsy's fingers peeled back the layers carefully, revealing a small, ornate box carved from dark wood, inlaid with mother-of-pearl in an intricate pattern. Inside lay a folded sheet of parchment, yellowed with age, and a delicate silver cross. Unfolding the parchment, Whimsy read aloud a cryptic note. To the keeper of the flame. The shadows lengthen, and the hour approaches when the truth must be revealed. Beware the serpent that coils beneath the altar. Parker whistled softly. A warning then, or a threat? A warning disguised as a riddle, Whimsy said. And the serpent? A symbol of deception, temptation, or perhaps a literal serpent? An emblem worn or hidden? Their thoughts were interrupted by a sudden commotion from the village square. Curious, they hurried outside to find Constable Wilmot wrestling with a large, bedraggled figure, a man who struggled fiercely until recognition dawned. "It's Briggs, the night watchman," Wilmot announced breathlessly. "He claims to have information about the chapel on the night of the murder, though he was too frightened to speak." Under Whimsy's steady gaze, Briggs's bravado crumbled into nervous confession. He spoke of a shadowy figure entering the chapel after midnight, someone moving silently past the altar towards the vestry. "I thought it was the bishop," he admitted, voice trembling, "but it was no man I knew." "An intruder, then," Whimsy said quietly, "or someone masked in the night." With this new lead, Whimsy requested to examine the vestry. It was a small room, scarcely larger than a closet, where vestments and sacred vessels were stored. Here, he noticed a subtle discrepancy. The lock, though apparently intact, bore faint scratches inconsistent with normal wear. Whimsy's gloved fingers traced the marks carefully. A delicate forced entry, one executed with care to avoid alarm. Inside the vestry, a small crumpled paper was found beneath a pile of embroidered linens. Whimsy smoothed it out with deliberate care. It was a ledger, listing names and dates, with a single column of numbers alongside each entry. Financial transactions, perhaps, Parker suggested. "More than that," Whimsy said. "These are offerings, but irregular ones, some dated after the bishop's death. Someone has been manipulating the records, falsifying donations to mask something else." He looked up, eyes gleaming. "We have uncovered a double life. One that has woven financial subterfuge with the religious facade. The question remains, who benefits?" The morning faded into afternoon as the implications settled. Whimsy pondered the tangled web of motives and secrets, sensing that the curtain was about to be pulled back on a hidden chamber of truths. Yet, as the candle in the chapel defied extinction, so too did the shadows refuse to retreat entirely. In this game of light and dark, Lord Peter Whimsy knew that every answer would reveal further questions, and that the serpent's coil was tightening ever closer. The candle flickered uncertainly in the chapel's chill, as though reluctant to illumine the dark corners that Lord Peter Whimsy so patiently scrutinized. He stood, hands clasped behind his back, eyes tracing the long shadows cast by the altar rails, the heavy velvet drapes, and the worn hymn books resting in their racks. The chapel was eerily silent, save for the faint tick of a distant clock, a metronome measuring the slow, relentless passage of time and secrets alike. Whimsy's thoughts drifted to Briggs's revelation. The curate Aldous, lurking near the vestry, well past midnight, was a serious anomaly that could no longer be ignored. The alibi, which once appeared solid, now hung by a thread thinner than the taper's flame. And yet, despite this discomforting inconsistency, Whimsy was careful not to leap to premature conclusions. His mind was attuned to the subtleties, the manner in which people shield their truths behind the polite veneer of everyday life. His gaze fell to the well itself, a stone structure capped by a wrought iron cover, slightly askew as if recently disturbed. It was an ordinary feature, one might think, but in the hands of a man such as Whimsy, even the most mundane became pregnant with possibility. Had it been a hiding place, a point of ingress or egress, or merely a meeting spot cloaked by darkness? To confirm, he knelt and examined the soil around the base. The earth was undisturbed save for a single set of footprints leading away toward the rectory. Intriguingly, they were rather shallow, as though the person who made them was careful, measured in their steps. Not the clumsy tread of a frightened witness, but a deliberate and practiced gait. Rising, Whimsy's attention was drawn to the church clock. The bell had tolled midnight some hours ago, but the clock face was frozen at the 11:45, its hands unmoving. He made a note. The clock stopped at 11:45 p.m. Odd coincidence or contrivance. A stopped clock never lies, but it can be manipulated. His reverie was interrupted by the soft creak of the chapel door. Edith Harrow entered, carrying a small tray with 2 glasses of sherry. She was an attractive woman, but tonight her usual composure was shadowed by worry. "Lord Peter," she said quietly, "I've just spoken with Miss Allen, the housekeeper. She mentioned something strange, something that I think you should." "Here," Whimsy gestured to a pew. "Pray, do sit and enlighten us." Edith settled, taking a breath before continuing. Miss Allen recalled that the night of the bishop's death, the candle in the chapel never went out. She said she herself extinguished all candles before retiring, but the one in the vestry was found still burning the following morning, steady and bright. Whimsy's eyes narrowed. A candle that refuses to be extinguished. Such a notion tempts the Gothic, yet we must remain tethered to reason. Could this be a deliberate ruse? Perhaps to mislead about the time of death or presence of a visitor. Edith nodded. "That was my thought." Miss Allen also mentioned that the candle was placed in a wrought iron holder by the altar, a holder that appeared slightly bent, as if it had been handled roughly. "Roughly," Whimsy murmured, "or hurriedly. If the murderer intended to stage the scene, the candle's flame might be a crucial detail, an alibi in wax and wick." He rose, pacing slowly. "A candle's flame depends on air currents, wick length, and fuel quality. A true student of such things might engineer it to persist, defying expectation. The fact that it was still burning so long after others were extinguished speaks to the hand of someone who knows the chapel intimately." Edith glanced about nervously. But who would do such a thing? Who would want to weave this web of confusion? Whimsy smiled faintly, the ghost of that dry British irony flickering in his tone. "My dear lady, we are all players on a stage, and the villain merely seeks to distract us with his legerdemain." He moved toward the vestry door and peered through the narrow glass panel, observing the antechamber's familiar clutter of hymnals and ecclesiastical paraphernalia. He then turned to Edith. "Have all the household staff been questioned thoroughly?" "About that night?" She nodded. "Yes, though all swear they heard nothing unusual. Except for Briggs, of course." Whimsy's gaze sharpened. Fear is often the softest pillow for silence, yet silence itself can be loud, and loud enough to conceal a multitude of sins. Later that evening, Parker and Whimsy reviewed the testimonies and the timeline once more in the dim light of the vicarage study. The ledger forgery, the cipher, the late-night presence of Aldous, all converged into a complex mosaic that teased at a sinister truth. Parker looked up from his notes. "One thing still puzzles me, my lord. Why would the bishop maintain correspondence with this mysterious AD? What connection could there be beyond mere professional intrigue?" Whimsy tapped his finger against his lip thoughtfully. "The bishop's letters suggest a conspiracy far more intricate than mere clerical malfeasance. AD is evidently a confidant or perhaps a blackmailer, or indeed a protector. The phrases serpent's coil and ledger's lie imply that someone close sought to undermine or control the bishop." He paused, recalling a detail overlooked. The bishop was known for his strict stance against financial corruption in the diocese. Such zealotry would earn him enemies, those who profit from the shadows. "Mr. Aldous, perhaps," Parker ventured. "Indeed, but also others we have yet to identify. The curate is but one thread, and the tapestry may conceal." More than one hand. A sudden thought struck Whimsy. "Parker, did you notice in the housekeeper's account the mention of the bent candle holder? It could have been moved or handled roughly only by someone familiar with the chapel's layout. This is no random act, it's deliberate. Are you suggesting the killer returned to the chapel after the murder?" Parker asked. "Quite possibly," Whimsy said. "To stage the scene, to manipulate evidence, or to send a message cloaked in symbol. The candle, the serpent, the cipher, they are markers designed to mislead the unwary. A knock interrupted their reverie. Edith entered, a letter in hand. This was left at the rectory this afternoon. No signature, but the handwriting resembles the bishop's. Whimsy took the letter and read aloud, "The truth is a flame that burns only when fed by lies. Beware those who watch in shadow, for their eyes are not on the flock but on the purse." He folded the paper with a wry smile. Our murderer enjoys metaphor as much as subterfuge. The letter confirms the bishop knew his adversary well, someone not only corrupt, but cunning enough to strike and misdirect with equal deftness. Who then has the means, the knowledge, and the motive? Edith asked, eyes wide with apprehension. Whimsy's reply was deliberate and slow. We shall soon find out, my dear, but for now we must keep our own counsel. The game is afoot, and the serpent coils ever tighter. As the candle burned low on the desk, its flame a stubborn sentinel against the encroaching night, Whimsy contemplated the next move. The pieces were aligning, the shadows deepening, and beneath it all a human drama of greed, jealousy, and betrayal unfolded like a dark rose. Tomorrow, he decided, would be devoted to the careful re-examination of the physical evidence, the candle's wax, the ledger's ink, the footprints near the well. In the meantime, patience was his ally, and observation his weapon. For in a mystery such as this, where every trivial detail might conceal a vital truth, Lord Peter Wimsey knew well that the devil was not only in the details, but in the shadows, between them. The first light of dawn filtered faintly through the stained glass windows of the chapel, casting prismatic splinters onto the worn stone floor. Lord Peter Wimsey arrived early, accompanied by the ever-diligent Parker, each armed with a resolve to probe deeper into the physical realm where clues awaited their unmasking. The house was still hushed, the servants yet to stir, and the village itself seemed to hold its breath, as if cognizant that the day would reveal truths long buried beneath genteel facades. Whimsy's eyes, sharp as ever, immediately sought the candle holder, the wrought iron bracket bent at an unnatural angle, the previous night. Kneeling, he examined the metal closely, noting faint abrasions that suggested it had been forcibly twisted, not merely knocked askew. "A violent adjustment," he murmured, "no mere accident. The culprit's haste or frustration betrayed by a simple ironwork." The candle itself, now extinguished, was inspected next. Its wax showed no unusual additives, confirming the flame's prolonged burn was not chemically aided. This meant that the explanation must lie in the conditions under which it was left burning. Whimsy's gaze then drifted to the air currents. The chapel's door was slightly ajar, a fact unnoticed until this moment. The draught, though subtle, could have fanned the flame gently, sustaining it longer than normal. Yet the door had been closed firmly by Miss Allen before retiring, as per her testimony. Was this an act of deliberate reopening, or was it negligence? Parker was already surveying the chapel floor, his eyes falling upon the footprints that had been noted near the well. "These shallows tracks you mentioned, my lord, do they correspond with any particular shoe pattern or size?" Whimsy reached for his notebook and spread out the servant's shoes he had discreetly collected. After careful comparison, they found a match in a pair of heavy-soled boots belonging to the curate Aldous. This confirmed the latter's nocturnal movements more firmly than any testimony could. "But this leads us to a puzzle, Parker," Whimsy observed. "Aldous is, by his own account, engaged in study late into the night. Yet these prints betray a clandestine journey to the well and beyond, near the hour of the bishop's death. We must now consider whether Aldous's role was as simple as that of a nocturnal scholar." Parker frowned, his mind turning over the implications. "And the ledger forgery? If Aldous was involved in such duplicity, it would certainly furnish motive." "Indeed. Yet motive alone never suffices," Whimsy reminded him. "We must seek opportunity and method. There is also the matter of the missing salver from the vestry, the one which should have held the bishop's correspondence during his evening prayers. It vanished on the night in question and was not recovered despite a thorough search. Could the salver have been used to carry letters, or something more sinister?" Parker asked. "Both possibilities must be entertained," Whimsy replied. "Letters indeed, or documents, or as is sometimes the case in these gentle villages, a receptacle for an incriminating item, poison perhaps, or a weapon. The absence of the salver is no trivial omission. Turning back to the door, Whimsy tested its lock. The mechanism was old but functional, yet the key had not been found in the usual place. The lock could be manipulated without a key if one were skilled, he noted. A fact we cannot overlook. With the chapel investigation concluded, the pair proceeded to the bishop's private study, a room cluttered with stacks of books, handwritten sermons, and scattered correspondence. The study was undisturbed since the night of the murder, save for the scattered papers. Whimsy examined the ledger once again, noting the elegant script and a certain cipher embedded in the margins, a code meant to conceal sensitive information from casual eyes. He tapped a pencil thoughtfully. This cipher, simple substitution, yet first glance, but with a layered complexity. Whoever deciphered this must have been intimately familiar with the bishop's personal codes, someone with access and intellectual parity, or greater. Parker interjected, "You think Aldous is capable of such cryptic artistry?" "Not impossible," Whimsy said, "but I have my doubts. The bishop's letters mention A.D. as a correspondent, not Aldous directly. It is conceivable that the curate served merely as an intermediary or dupe." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden deliberate knock. The door opened to reveal Edith Harrow, her face pale but composed. "My lord, I have just returned from speaking with Miss Allen," she announced. "There is more to the story of the candle." Whimsy gestured her to continue. Miss Allen confided that on the night of the murder, after extinguishing the chapel candles, she saw a shadow near the vestry window. She thought it was the wind at first, but then noticed the faint glimmer of a hand holding a taper. She said the figure lingered, moving as though adjusting something near the altar before slipping away into the darkness. Whimsy's lips twitched in a half-smile. "So our murderer is not only bold but precise, returning to the scene to rearrange elements and fabricate a narrative." Edith hesitated, then added, "There is one more thing. The vestry window, normally latched from the inside, was found ajar this morning, a fact none of the household noticed before." "Indeed," Whimsy mused. "This gives our nocturnal visitor a means of ingress and egress, unnoticed." Parker frowned. "If the window was opened from inside, it implies the killer was inside the chapel after the murder, which aligns with the candle's flame continuing." Whimsy nodded slowly. "Yes. And it raises questions about timing. The bell tolls, the candle burns, footsteps by the well, and now an unseen visitor who manipulated the scene after the fact. Our timeline grows ever more tangled." He stood, moving to the window and peering into the grey dawn. "To unweave this tangle, we must understand the relationships involved. Who among the household had reason to deceive, and who possessed the cunning to carry it out? The answer lies in the intricate dance of psychology as much as in physical. Proof?" Edith, sensing the weight of his thought, asked, "Is there anyone you suspect now, my lord?" Whimsy paused, choosing his words with care. "I suspect many, Edith. Suspicion is a mantle we all wear in turn, but it is motive and opportunity, examined through the lens of human frailty, that will illuminate the guilty party." He returned to the study desk, picking up a small folded piece of paper from among the bishop's papers, an unassuming note bearing a single word, Veritas. "Truth," Whimsy said softly, "the flame that burns at the heart of every enigma. The candle's light in the chapel may have been the first deception, but Whimsy knew it would be the last flicker before the darkness was pierced by clarity. And he intended to ensure that clarity came, precise, merciless, and final. The morning stretched on with a deceptive calm as Lord Peter, Whimsy, and Parker withdrew to the drawing-room, where the servants' comings and goings could be quietly observed without drawing undue attention. The air was thick with the faint aroma of pipe tobacco and aged mahogany, the usual comforts of a country house, now tinged with the chill of suspicion. Whimsy lit a fresh cigar with a slow deliberation that bespoke his mind at work rather than idle leisure, while Parker prepared to review the notes they had amassed. "Parker," Whimsy began, tapping ash into the porcelain tray, "there is an art to timing a revelation, much like Shakespeare's dramas. The final act must hold all the subtlety and surprise one can muster, yet never so labyrinthine as to lose the audience." He allowed himself a thin smile. Fortunately, our audience comprises a house full of agitated witnesses rather than theatre-goers. Our task is to catch the villain before they slip the noose. Parker nodded, already engaged in cataloguing the evidence. The misaligned clocks, the curious absence of the salver, the footprints near the well, the discrepancies in the servants' testimonies, and, of course, the mysterious cipher in the bishop's ledger. It seems to me, Parker ventured, that the missing salver must have been key. Someone intended to remove a crucial piece of evidence, or perhaps to conceal the very act. Quite so, Whimsy agreed. And yet none of the servants admitted to seeing it, an omission or a lie. He pondered the servants' statements with their meticulous denials. People who swear ignorance often know far more than they care to admit, especially in houses built on discretion and social hierarchy. The discussion was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Edith Harrow entered, carrying a bundle of papers. "My lord, I thought you might wish to see these," she said, placing them on the table. "They are letters from the bishop's personal correspondence, some quite recent." Whimsy adjusted his pince-nez and began to peruse the letters with the studied care of a man unravelling a tightly woven tapestry. The correspondence ranged from pastoral concerns to delicate inquiries about diocesan finances. Yet one letter caught his eye. It was addressed to an enigmatic AD, written in a tone of cautious urgency. "Do you know who this AD might be?" Whimsy asked Edith. She shook her head. "Only that it was kept secret from most of the household. Even the curate, Aldous, seemed unaware." "Curious," Whimsy mused. "A secret correspondent, shadowed by discretion, often the hallmark of entangled affairs or inconvenient truths." He made a note to cross-reference this with the ciphered ledger entries. The afternoon waned as Whimsy and Parker resumed their rounds, questioning the household staff anew, but with a refined focus. Miss Allen, the chapel maid, seemed nervous. Under scrutiny, her earlier composure now punctuated by fleeting glances and hesitant replies. "I might have heard voices near the vestry the night of the murder," she admitted reluctantly, "though it could have been my imagination." "Voices, plural?" Whimsy inquired. "Yes, my lord. A man's voice and a woman's arguing softly. This revelation added a new layer to the mystery." Whimsy pressed further, but the maid's fear was evident. "Please, sir, I mean no harm." "Of course, my dear," he assured her gently. "Fear is a natural companion in such times." Back in the drawing room, Whimsy summoned Edith and Parker to deliberate on these new developments. Voices near the vestry window, a secret correspondent, and a vanished salver. We are drawing a map of shadows, each more elusive than the last. Achean spoke thoughtfully. If there was an argument, it might point to a motive more personal than financial, perhaps jealousy or betrayal. "Indeed," Whimsy said, his eyes gleaming with renewed purpose. "The psychological dimension is vital. The killer is not merely a criminal, but a person shaped by passion, fear, and calculation." Their reverie was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Charles Montague, who had been quietly conferring with local constables. "Lord Peter," he said gravely, "we have uncovered a curious detail. The curate Aldous' alibi for the time around the bishop's death is shaky. Witnesses place him near the village tavern, contrary to his claims of solitary study." Whimsy nodded, unsurprised. "A discrepancy indeed, though I hesitate to condemn without a full picture. Appearances are often deceptive, especially in cases of this complexity." Montague added, "There's more. The ledger entries suggest embezzlement, monies redirected through coded accounts. Aldous' fingerprints were found on the ledger." "A tempting target," Whimsy remarked dryly. "If he is guilty, it would explain motive, but we must be cautious. The true cleverness lies in setting a scapegoat." The conversation turned to the candle's curious behavior. Whimsy reiterated his theory. The candle's flame endured longer because of a slight draught from the vestry window left ajar, a detail easily overlooked but critical to the timeline. "That means the murderer returned to the chapel after the bell tolled, moving carefully to arrange the scene," Whimsy explained. "A calculated act designed to mislead." Edith frowned. "Who would dare risk being seen so brazenly?" "Only one who felt invulnerable or desperate," Whimsy answered. "Or perhaps someone well acquainted with the house's rhythms and blind spots." The next hours passed in a blur of meticulous questioning and cross-referencing testimonies. A pattern began to emerge: the secret correspondences, the whispered quarrel, the absent salver, and Aldous' dubious whereabouts all hinted at a tangled web of intrigue. Yet, a missing piece remained elusive. As evening approached, Whimsy requested to see the vestry once more. The room was suffused with the pale light of a late spring dusk, the stained glass casting ghostly reflections. He knelt beside the empty spot where the salver had rested and examined the floor closely. There, half hidden beneath the rug, he discovered a slight indentation in the floorboards, as if something had been pressed against them, something rectangular and thin. With a gentle hand he pried the floorboard free to reveal a concealed compartment. Inside lay the missing salver, tarnished and cold, but with a folded envelope resting atop it. Whimsy opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter, penned in a hurried hand. It read, "If this is found, then all is lost. I have no choice but to reveal the truth. The bishop was not the man we believed. His charities were a facade, his trust a chain. I regret the necessity, but the house must be cleansed of corruption. The candle that would not go out is the mark of this night's reckoning." Whimsy's eyes flickered with grim satisfaction. So the bishop's death was more than mere murder. It was a reckoning. Parker looked puzzled. But who wrote this confession, and what does the candle signify? The candle, dear Parker, was a signal, an act of symbolic defiance, someone who sought to illuminate the darkness while cloaked in shadow. As they pondered the letter, footsteps echoed from the corridor. The door opened abruptly, revealing Aldous, pale and trembling. "Lord Peter," he stammered, "I must speak. The truth cannot wait." Whimsy regarded him coolly. "Then speak, Reverend. The hour has come." Aldous took a deep breath, his eyes filled with a tortured mixture of guilt and resolve. The bishop's sins ran deep. "I loved this house, this flock, but I could no longer turn a blind eye. I confronted him, demanded he cease his duplicities. It was not my hand that ended him, but another's, someone who feared exposure more than justice." Whimsy's gaze sharpened. "And who is this other?" Aldous faltered, then whispered, "Miss Harrow, she knew too much." A chill settled in the room as Edith's name hung between them, heavy with implication. The candle's flame flickered, threatening to gutter, but Whimsy's mind was alight with certainty. The final act was at hand, and the curtain was about to rise on the truth concealed beneath the candle's stubborn glow. The drawing-room was thick with tension when Lord Peter Whimsy rose, his slender figure commanding the space with an unspoken authority. The others, Inspector Montague, Parker, Edith Harrow, and the pale, trembling Aldous, watched him intently, sensing that the moment of reckoning was upon them. Whimsy began with his customary languid elegance, fingers lightly tapping the armrest of his chair. "It has been a night of shadows, of half-truths and whispered secrets. Yet, as all things must, the veil now lifts, and the candle that refused to be extinguished reveals its true flame." He paused, allowing the phrase to hang like a delicate smoke ring in the air before continuing. "We know the bishop was a man whose virtues concealed vices, financial deceit, manipulation, and a heart ill at ease with honesty. Reverend Aldous, your confrontation with him was indeed sincere, though it did not end as you intended. You did not kill the bishop, but your quarrel set into motion events darker than mere dispute." A flicker of relief crossed Aldous' face, quickly replaced by anxiety as Whimsy's gaze shifted. "Miss Harrow, your role is less innocent. Your knowledge of the bishop's duplicity was deeper, and your fear of exposure greater. You found the bishop in the chapel after the evening bell, the vestry window ajar, and the candle still burning, a symbol of your resolve and your guilt." Edith's composure cracked. "I had no choice. The bishop threatened to ruin everything. He was to expose my past, the secrets I kept hidden from this house and myself. I acted to protect what little I have left." Whimsy's tone sharpened, though not unkindly. "Protection born of desperation is no justification for murder. The salver you hid, the forged entries in the ledger, the staged quarrel to implicate others, all carefully orchestrated to mislead. Yet you underestimated the clockwork of truth. The candle's persistence betrayed you. Only an open window could sustain that flame so late." Inspector Montague nodded grimly. The footprints outside, the altered timelines, all confirm your presence and intent. Edith's defiance faltered, and finally, with a sigh heavy as the dusk, she whispered, "I am sorry." Whimsy stood and flicked the ash from his cigar. The candle that would not go out is, in truth, a metaphor for the truth itself. No matter the darkness we conjure, it persists until unveiled. Turning to the others, he offered a faint smile. Justice will take its course, but let us not forget that behind every crime lies a human heart, broken and flawed. As the police moved to take Edith into custody, Whimsy and Parker stepped out into the cool night. The stars above Harrowby Manor glittered with cold clarity. Parker broke the silence. "Well, my lord, another tangled web unraveled. Quite satisfying, if I may say." Whimsy allowed himself a rare chuckle. "Indeed, Parker, a dance of shadows punctuated by a single stubborn flame. And now we depart, leaving this house to its secrets and its ghosts." He lit another cigar, inhaling deeply. As the bard reminds us, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars but in ourselves. Tonight the stars bore witness to that truth. With a final nod, Lord Peter Whimsy disappeared into the night, leaving behind a house where silence reigned once, more but with the candle's flame at last extinguished.